Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Asian America, the Ken Fong Podcast. Our mission continues to be to invite Asian American culture makers and culture shapers to share their stories with us. And as always, I'm your host, Ken Fong. This is episode number 313, and our guest this episode is a queer Asian American musician and rapper named Jackie Faye, otherwise known as Drippy J. She drove all the way from Dallas during that infamous freeze earlier this year to further establish herself in the bustling and hustling LA music scene. We talk about where her ideas come from, how she's evolving as an Asian American artist, and whether the current anti-Asian racism is also influencing her thinking and writing. You'll get to hear a couple of snippets of her latest tracks. I promise you that she is a fascinating, intelligent, creative soul. Doing this podcast continues to feel worthwhile, and it brings me lots of joy. If you find it beneficial, please consider becoming a monthly patron. You can go to www.patreon.com. Even just $2 a month adds up to help defray what it costs me to keep this going. And also a big thank you to those of you who've already become my patrons. I'm not proud to admit this, but the last couple of weeks, I've caught myself wondering if one of my neighbors is a white Christian nationalist. Now, if you don't know what that is, you can certainly tune into one of the Toucan special episodes where we really talk about white Christian nationalism. But in a nutshell, it's essentially where conservative Christians have wrapped their Bibles with the American flag. This group has really formed an enduring part of Trump's Make America Great Again base. Now, why am I thinking this? Well, we've lived over 30 years next to these people, and they've been great neighbors. Well, great except for the number of years where they parked this double XL-sized RV on our property line, which I didn't enjoy, but I really couldn't say anything because it was on their property. At any rate, just before the pandemic, they sold that RV, and so both of our views has been restored. And again, they've been just wonderful neighbors. One of their youngest daughters actually is the same age as our daughter, and so when they were much younger, they used to, run over to each other's houses and play. So why am I starting to think that they're white Christian nationalists? Well, number one, they are white. They are Christian, and I would say they would identify still as evangelical Christians, although I haven't asked them. But just from the various indicators, I think it's a pretty accurate assessment. They hosted a movie night in their backyard last week, and the husband set up a portable screen, and they had a projector, and there was a bunch of young people over there. And I asked a couple of days later, I said, what was that all about? And the wife said, it was the youth group from our church. And I said, what movie did you show? And I was thinking maybe one of the Transformers films or, possibly Lord of the Rings, since it has more kind of a Christian undertone. But she told me, no, we showed The War Room. I'm thinking, interesting. That's one of those made by Christians, made for Christians movies that I personally have no interest in watching because it just feels more like propaganda, but that's me. And, what this movie's all about, is really how you need to have this prayer room, a war room, where you faithfully go to do battle, spiritual battle with the powers of darkness, and to call upon God and all of God's forces of positivity and love and justice to overcome these powers. Now, I'm just saying that having never seen this movie, but I know a little bit. Okay, so to me, it's more conservative Christians who would really be into that movie. Okay, so there's that piece of evidence. So, white, conservative Christian, and then there's this flag thing. They have consistently displayed an American flag, not gross proportions, in front of their front door. And I don't know if they've been doing that for years. I don't remember it being there. I want to say that maybe during the Trump years, that flag started to appear, but I can't say that for sure. As I'm recording this, we're about a week away from celebrating the 4th of July. And so, part of me was thinking, well, maybe they're just early. They're celebrating the 4th in this way. But I'd say it's pretty honest. I'd say it's fair to state that every day that flag is there. I'm not even sure they take it down at sundown and put it back up at sunrise. It's just it's not on a flagpole. It's on a stick. Now, why does their displaying that flag on a daily basis trigger me into wondering, not thinking, but wondering if they are actually white Christian nationalists? Well, it's because, especially during the Trump years, but even prior, the Stars and Stripes have come to be less of a patriotic generic symbol and more of a stand-in, especially outside of the Deep South, for the Stars and Bars, which is the Confederate flag. I've already talked about how when I'm out riding further south than where we live, especially during the run-up to the 2020 election, we'd see these jacked up four-wheel drive vehicles with these gigantic American flags, and usually Blue Lives Matter or Trump flags, MAGA flags flying as these people race all over the local streets. And so the American flag, sadly, has come to represent kind of a big middle finger to non-white Americans. And certainly white Christian nationalists proudly display the American flag in their sanctuaries without a second thought. The church that we now attend, one of the things that attracted me to it just visually was there was no American flag in the sanctuary. I mean, I grew up at our Chinese Baptist church in Sacramento, where there was the Christian flag on one side and the American flag on the other. And during summer vacation Bible school, we would put our hands over our hearts and we would recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and then we would recite the Christian pledge. And it was just all wrapped up neatly into one little ball. Well, I think it's safe to say that it's only the most conservative churches here in America that now display American flags prominently and proudly. They probably also on 4th of July weekend, they will be singing God Bless America and some other patriotic tunes. And it's just this complete kind of intermingling, if you will, of what it means to be a good patriotic American and what it means to be a good God-fearing Christian. It's like all one and the same thing, and usually it assumes that you're white. So, yeah, that's why I've been having these thoughts. And we have a great relationship. We talk very friendly. They've never, ever sent me any sort of signals that would indicate that they're racist people. So this could all just be a figment of my imagination. The fact that the American flag has become a triggering symbol for me of white nationalism. Unfortunately, that's kind of where a lot of us find ourselves today. Now, I'm not prepared to engage the husband or the wife in a conversation around this question of whether or not they identify as white Christian nationalists because A, that's just too potent of a conversation for us to have given the kind of conversations that we've had in the past. And two, as an Asian American who is also not excited about confrontation and conflict, it's just kind of better to let sleeping dogs lie and to even just give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they did not have Trump Pence signs on their lawn in the run up to the last election. They don't wear MAGA gear. I mean, there's nothing to indicate that they are white Christian nationalists. So I'm just kind of connecting dots that maybe don't need to be connected. Do you have anybody in your life that, you're in good terms with, but maybe the last bunch of years, you've kind of seen some disparate pieces that are kind of making you wonder, kind of like I'm wondering about one of my neighbors? What do you do about it? I don't know that it's worthwhile to engage in those kind of conversations because, like, if I did that with my neighbor and I found out that they are proudly white Christian nationalists, that's going to be problematic for us going forward. I don't think any one of us is moving, but I think it would definitely dampen our friendship. If they're not, and I not accuse them, but I ask them this question, it may be so offensive to them that it still dampens our relationship. So I'm just going to let this just kind of sit there, not even simmer, because it's not necessarily even cooking. And I'm just curious. You can write me on our Facebook page in the message section about whether you deal with this. If you have dealt with this, how has it turned out? Thanks again for listening. And I know you're really going to enjoy this conversation next with Jackie Faye. If you're a regular listener to this show, you know that although it's not exclusively a place for Asian American artists, I have a special place in my heart. In fact, I would call it a burden to feature Asian American artists, whether they're well known or whether they want to and hope to be well known. And our guest today is, I don't know, I feel Jackie Faye or Drippy J, you're kind of in this movement phase where you're definitely pumping out content on the internet. You're an Asian American LGBTQ rapper who by day is a data engineer. And, you know, I've been marinating in your content now for several months. And so I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kid. I appreciate that intro. What up, you guys? How's it going? I hope you're staying sane and safe. All that.
Yeah, well, we had to reschedule this because I think originally when we were going to do this, my internet was down. And then I think you were still in Dallas at the time, and you guys were going through that whole freeze thing and the power grid and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about that because I feel like everyone just likes to give Texas shit. And
why not?
And as a Texan, I can give Texas shit, but I actually drove through that snowstorm to get to LA, and that was a little crazy. But I mean, we're out here. Follow your dreams, kids.
So, so you are right now in LA. How long have you been in LA?
I drove out here, I think, what was it? Third week of February.
Oh, so you've been out here for a minute.
I don't exactly remember off the top of my head, to be honest. So maybe I was trying to get that out of my memory. The driving.
Yeah. I've never made that drive going the other direction. How long does it take?
It was total 24 hours.
Oh, my goodness.
So I drove 12 hours on a Saturday and 12 hours on a Sunday.
By yourself?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, it's got to be because LA is a artist destination. Is that what's going on?
I think so, especially as like an Asian American artist.
Yeah.
There are just more Asians out here, like, period. Or Asian Americans specifically.
Yeah.
And then you also add the music industry. I also had friends out here. It was also the pandemic.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I find you fascinating because there are so many angles and facets that make up who you are. And so I'm just going to kind of guide you through talking about some of these different elements of you. And so the first thing that jumps out at me, go ahead.
Oh, no. There are interesting facets to everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's just presented.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not saying you're the only one.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I first want to talk about your ethnic identity. So, you know, I see you as a Chinese Korean or a Taiwanese Korean. What's going on there? How did your parents get together? How has this combination shaped your sense of who you are?
Yeah, you know, well, my parents, you know, they got together in college, so it's just really interesting. I think my dad was from Taiwan, so he like immigrated from Taiwan. I don't know what he was here for, but I think he was like DJing at a party.
Oh, really?
At this like Asian association in college or something like that. And my mom immigrated here from Korea when she was 13. So my grandparents on my mom's side and my entire family on my mom's side is from Korea. From Incheon specifically. Hey, Chinatown there. I don't know. I've been there when I was like 9. But so then what's really interesting is though my dad, I grew up more closely with my mom side of the family because my dad passed away when I was like 9.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. It's cool.
Was it accident, illness?
Cancer.
Oh.
Gotta stay away from those ramen packets.
Yeah. Ramen.
I'm kidding, but I think so that was just really interesting. So I was closer to my mom's side of the family, and it's weird because they would always be like, you know, you're Chinese.
Seriously.
However, yes, like we are Chinese, but then like you have kimchi in the fridge 24/7. Grandma's making like jjajang, you know, like it's really interesting. And I think what happened was my mom was like 4th generation or 3rd generation Korean born. Right. And I'm barely like 1st generation American born.
Yeah.
But I think what was going on there is because they were so marginalized as a community in Korea, like they weren't allowed citizenship and stuff. I think they had Taiwanese citizenship because mainland China also didn't give them citizenship.
Yeah.
So they felt like very attached to like the Chineseness that was passed down. And so they're like way more intense about certain things. But I don't know, it's a really interesting mix. But yeah, we culturally, I'd say like still very Korean, but that's that weird Chinese Korean mix, that Hua Chao side. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got you got the kimchi and you got the gochujang in the fridge. But hey, we're Chinese.
Yeah.
We're Chinese.
Yeah, and the Korean church and all of it.
Oh, really? That too?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Also, just Korean church meals slap after, and so like that kind of stuff. But I mean, in terms of how it informs who I am,
Yeah.
for sure. I think growing up in Texas, though, like there wasn't that many Asian people outside of my family, so I think my cultural identity was so tied to my family. And I didn't want that I think everyone goes through that phase of like trying to be white or whatever.
Sure.
But then after I sort of learned about like, oh no, I'm actually Chinese Korean. Like I'm not just like Asian, like this like super high level like label that kind of doesn't really mean anything but means everything, you know?
Yeah.
And after I explored that and was like, oh, and there was also in LA like a huge Hua Chao community out here of just like Chinese Koreans, like
Really?
specifically Chinese Koreans. Yeah. Like jjajangmyeon, that's our people.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's a lot of those.
True.
Yeah, they're all out here. And so like exploring that. And then in college, I joined like the Korean Student Association. And that was super cool because it just made me feel like more on like the same cultural wavelength from people outside of my family.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just you're describing this much of yourself, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I mean, some of our closest friends, the wife is Korean, the husband is Canto, and they have two of you. They have Chinese Korean kids. So it's like, oh yeah, I do know some.
Yeah.
And when I talk to any kind of Hapa, you know, I often ask them, so I'm going to ask you this. Do you get tired of people saying, oh, so you're half this and half that? Because I've come to the conclusion, and I have Hapa nieces and nephews. It's like, no, you're not half this, half that. You're double.
I don't know if I would consider myself, because when I think Hapa, I think like half white specifically, but maybe that's outdated or something. I don't know. No, I honestly, I get sometimes when I think too hard about it, I get like confused and I'm just like, I'm Texan. But I'm definitely, having clarity and understanding like where your families come from or like how they met, even like just being able to explain to you like where my parents come from, like helps me understand my Asianness when I'm a little bit more removed from the traditional idea of what it means to be Asian, like without the American part.
Sure.
If you're like my mom, if she has this like very strict understanding of what a Chinese person should be, like you act as you're like, oh, I need to be this or that. But then I feel like when you're, you have that hyphenated Americanness, it becomes a little bit more flexible and it becomes malleable in the sense that you kind of sort of start to not necessarily detach yourself from that cultural identity. I think that's what people try to do if they really hate themselves for it. But it almost, the boundaries of what that Asianness means to you, almost it blends in a little, not blends, I don't know, evolves. Maybe evolves is a better term.
Okay. Yeah. My own life journey and then some of the research I've done, not a lot, is for many of us Asian Americans, there's kind of a chronological evolution. Mm-hmm. A lot of us go through, I wish I was white. Maybe I am white, you know, sort of thing. And then
no, the answer is always no.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's.
If anyone's confused out there, anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
And then I think, it also is impacted very much by region of the country we're growing up in, right? So I've always been a West Coast person. Usually around college or after college, young adult time, is when there's kind of a reawakening to Asianness. And so we're not denying the fact that we have assimilated and acculturated. And there's this, you know, like if I dropped you in Taiwan or Korea, or if I got dropped in China, we would be a fish out of water. Like we don't fit there. We're American, but at the same time, non-Asian Americans see us as perpetual foreigners. And so there's kind of an awakening to what's going on with my Asianness? What's going on with my Chineseness? You know what? I just got back this weekend from Northern California, where my late father's youngest sister passed away in her 90s. And so she was buried in this cemetery that has my dad's parents buried there. And so it was kind of an interesting journey to go back for my aunt's funeral and then spend time wandering this cemetery with all these Chinese headstones. And then to find my grandma, who I knew, like she died in 1977 at 95. And then to see her husband's headstone, like he died in the 1930s. And I never met him, right? And just to get this sense of, yeah, that's part of my history too. I'm standing on a bunch of shoulders of people that I couldn't even converse with. And yet their decisions resulted in my being who I am.
Right. It's funny how it works that way.
Yeah.
And then you just realize you just don't have a choice in certain things too. Yeah. And I think that's important. Like you don't have a choice in how it sort of like goes. But yeah, that is really cool about how all those decisions like when you think about it retroactively lead up to building the core foundations of your identity. I feel that for sure. The reawakening that you're talking about. Yeah. I feel that for sure in terms of like coming after you realize that, okay, like self-loathing is really not the way to go. Hopefully everyone comes to that point.
Nice move.
I also feel like in terms of the American identity, there's oftentimes it's very binary. There's almost two American identities, mainstream identities, right? I mean, there's plenty of identities within the American like umbrella, whatever that means. But I feel like, it's the white, there's the America, like the white America, and then there's also the Black America. It's not necessarily binary like that because obviously there's way more people in between, whether they be Asian, Latin, what have you, Native.
Right.
But then I feel like there's almost like this, because of just how things are, like where power lies and power doesn't, you almost have to feel like you have to choose like one or the other, not necessarily Black, but it pretty much is. It's like white. You're white or not white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like as Asians, because we're so close, we can feel so close to like whiteness sometimes. We allow ourselves, or certain communities allow ourselves to think that we can be in that category. Because I mean, that category is winning. And who doesn't like to win? But I don't think we could. We're not white.
Oh.
We're not white. Period.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if any of that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
I feel like that's... Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question, which I was going to save for later, but now you just kind of made it. It's like right there in front of me. Earlier this year, you made the move from Dallas, where there weren't as many Asian Americans, to the West Coast, especially LA, where there's a ton of us Asian Americans.
Yep.
And at the same time, you've chosen a profession that kind of fits within the Asian American stereotype of engineer. And then at the same time, your avocation as an artist, a rapper, is now kind of bumping up and trying to find a space in a space that's been defined by Black rappers. Right? And so my question, Jackie Faye, is you're straddling this huge divide. On the one hand, you're making it as a model minority Asian engineer by day, and yet literally by night, you are trying to carve out a niche in this binary that really shouldn't be a binary. That's saying, well, I don't have to deny my Asian Americanness to make it as a rapper, even though it's been such a Black defined realm. And then on top of that, a female rapper who's Asian American and also a sexual minority. So I'm fascinated by maybe it's not a choice on your part. It's a calling. It's just like, well, I gotta do it.
Like why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? That's a great question. I mean, it's always good to ask why. It's if anything, it's the most important question. Well, one, I just want to say there's a really cool, I don't know if we should include this or not. It's up to you. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah. I was watching his interview. I love physicists and the way they talk. I know he's problematic for a lot of other reasons, but he once said in an interview, I think it was one of my favorite quotes. Maybe he was quoting somebody else. But he said, human beings search for meaning and we look for meaning as if it's under a rock. But we don't realize that we actually have more power than that. We have the power to create meaning for ourselves. And I just like took that away and I was like, yes. So how that relates to your question is for a long period of my life, like I was a young closeted kid from Dallas, Texas, grew up hood adjacent, and, you know, probably knew I was gay since I was like very young. I don't know how young, but, you know, grew up in a home that wasn't necessarily the most emotionally secure or, you know, just whatever have you. And so I just wanted to get out. You know, I wanted to leave Texas. Not that many Asian people. Yeah. My dad, before he passed, lived in LA. He was out here doing creative stuff too.
Nice.
And we would come here every summer and I'd be like, wow, this is amazing. I want to, you know, be out here. And then so I had this dream of just leaving Texas and going to LA and then just being financially secure so that I basically could just do whatever I want without my family without having like, to answer to anybody to determine what I wanted to do. Does that make sense?
Totally. And like, some of it, you know, your parents, your mom, it's just worried about how you're doing. It's not because they want to control you.
Right. Or for me, it was in a sense of my parents weren't, my mom's side of the family wasn't educated. We were a blue collar family. Right. So you know how there's two branches of Asians. I always say that. We were not the PhD Asians. Okay. we were the restaurant Asians. So I think that because of all that, and I was almost in like survival mode, like focus, like get out, be free, do what you want to do and do your best to fulfill your own promises to yourself kind of thing. Yeah. Go out to LA, just bust your ass. I mean, I busted my ass. I made it to LA for college and that was amazing, right? And then so that whole journey, I was like, I'm not going to be broke when I go to college. So I chose, at first I got in for like astronautical engineering or something like that. Because I knew that there were no girls in that program. I was like, take me.
And a girl of color. Come on, take me.
Yeah. So then the first midterm exam, I got like a 13%. It was something about rocket science. I was like, I can't pass this. And so I chose computer science. And so and I got this job very luckily. I'm glad they took me and I got this job. And, you know, it launched me into a completely different socioeconomic class almost than what I was accustomed to. And I got there and I was miserable. Doctor, I was miserable. I hated it. But I'm older now and I know how to like cope or understand that I can get through it. But man, it was really depressing and I hated it. And I was like, this sucks. I felt like like a machine almost, like they just like suck your soul out and you're for 8 hours a day, you're just a machine and just tell me what to do and like, I'll do it. And I was like, this is meaningless and it's really sucked. And for a couple of years, you know, just drinking really heavily and just not doing good things to my body or mental health. Like doing music consistently all throughout that was what I realized gave me meaning and gave me purpose and gave me the motivation to keep going. Like, meaning doing music and trying the idea of getting better, almost like achieving this like sifu, or I don't know what the female equivalent would like sima, whatever, like equivalent of just having that journey and time into something gives me motivation and sort of purpose. And so that is who I really am and what I want to do. And that is also my dream. So like, that is what I'm chasing. And so the little rap thing isn't a little rap thing. It's a little rap thing right now, but it's not going to be, you know? So that's what all that was about.
You know, listeners, you can definitely search for Jackie Faye on YouTube and you're going to see this rapper in these phenomenal, fabulous outfits, right? and with attitude. And I'm trying to imagine that person going to work as a data engineer before the pandemic. Yeah, and even with your hair, the way you know, do your hair and color your hair. Yeah. Do you raise eyebrows at work? Even if they do know, well, just your whole, I don't say that you go, you know, with your whole baller sort of rapper outfits, but you still, I'm sure, even if you're trying to dress to blend in, you still kind of have a swagger to you. And I'm just wondering if, I'm just wondering if people like, she's kind of not like really like us.
I mean, I don't really pay too much. I mean, I definitely don't do the crazy stuff. I mean, sometimes I wear my hair down, sometimes I don't. Luckily, I work in my work setting. It's a little bit more liberal in that way. Not like politically liberal, but more liberal in terms of dress. Yeah. And so it doesn't affect me too much. But yeah, and if people think stuff, I don't really care anyway. It's like I do well in my job, so no, people leave me alone. I'm cool. I clock out, I do my work, and then I just focus on what I really need to focus on, which is music.
Nice. I'm guessing that since you drove out and relocated here to LA, especially with the pandemic, you've been able to keep that job and do your work remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And luckily, that is a privilege and a blessing.
Yeah.
And just, I'm very lucky to have been able to do that, because originally that's not even what I was thinking, but yes, the work from home life has definitely allowed me these opportunities to be able to film live streams, to be able to talk to you and talk to other people while I work. The work hasn't gone away for sure. It's just shifted in terms of what I'm able to squeeze in or work around, and even just relocate to places just to make connections and all that.
Some of the artists that I know who've been doing it for decades, they said they reached a point, and it doesn't sound like you're at that point yet, but I would love to hear what you think about this. They said, we reached a point where we couldn't keep straddling the passion pursuits and the thing that was paying the bills. Like at some point, it just got to be counterproductive. And I know for musicians especially, who have late night gigs, and then after the gigs, you go out for soju and food and whatever, and you get in at 4 a.m. and if you have to, be at work at 8. And so they said, at some point it wasn't even the logistical contradictions. I felt like I got to go all in at some point or go home.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Yes. Yeah? And you do. I think you do have to go all in at some point. I mean, you didn't see Michael Jackson out here I mean, maybe Michael Jackson, but of course you have to go. And that's a problem I would love to have. I just, right now, once that starts bringing money, or once I can start making the decisions to be able to invest in my music career more seriously, to where it supports and it's able to pay for my living situation. So, because the last thing I want to do is be broke. That's not cute. It's not cute. I want to, it's not cute, sure. At least for, so once I get there, I would love to have that problem and just be able to start, just dropping that stuff. But it hasn't gotten there, and I think I have a lot more work to do before I get to that point.
Sure.
I haven't been putting out as much as I want to or need to be able to get to that point.
I think some of these artists, these older artists, were saying, many of them came to the conclusion that straddling these two lives, these two worlds, was actually becoming an impediment to them getting there. Mm. It's like there's an old movie called Hunt for the Red October. In this movie, this Soviet sub-captain steals this state-of-the-art submarine, and he's got all these young Soviet naval officers on board with him, and they're all going to relocate to America. But then at their first meal in the officers' mess, he goes, oh, by the way, the last thing I did before I left Russia is I left a note on the Secretary of the Navy's desk telling him I just stole the sub. So this is not a secret anymore. And the young officers freak out. And they're like, are you insane? The whole Soviet Navy's going to go try to sink us. Why did you do that? And, Sean Connery's playing the Soviet sub-captain, so it's ridiculous. He's got the Scottish brogue, and he's like, motivation. Right? So he kind of was referring back to, there was a Spanish explorer who came to the Americas a long time ago, and he burned all the ships so they couldn't go home. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like, no, you're not living with two minds. You've got to be focused on what you're doing here. And I think that's what I'm hearing from some of these older artists. Yeah. And there's at some point I had to burn my ship, and that didn't guarantee that I was going to make it. But if I was I don't want to get to the end of my life and go, man, I don't know if I really gave it my all. Right.
Well, I'm definitely giving it my all. Well, right now, but I think you're right in that eventually, you kind of have to decide between the two. And I will probably have to eventually. It's not like I'm going to be doing this until I'm 40. At some point, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I haven't even gotten there yet. But I will say, there needs to be almost like a grind right now to even figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
You know, before even being like, all right, fuck all this. Like, I'm doing this, you know?
Yeah.
There needs to be some sort of plan in place. And right now, I don't even have a full plan in place on how to get there, because it is really tricky, like being an Asian woman in the industry, like figuring out, like, how does this work? Like, who do I need to talk to here? Like, how do I get my music out in places? Like, how do I get them to labels and all this other kind of stuff? I'm a lot more green, and there's a lot more work I need to do. But I am putting a plan together, and I will give it my all at a certain point soon, because I can't decide when I'm 35.
No, you missed it.
Right. And I'm probably even like, I'm like, what, 26 now? So yeah, I mean, it's now or never. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to do it when I'm 50. So yeah.
Unless you're Jay-Z.
That's what. No, yeah. Or Tupac.
Yeah,
or
Tupac.
Like,
yeah,
no.
Some of those guys got murdered.
Yeah,
right. I noticed in listening to your catalog here, you're doing a lot more singing.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I first listened to Ling Ling, and that's straight up rap. And so I thought, okay, I know where she's coming from. I know how she does it. And then I'm listening to these other tracks, and it's like, not only are you singing, you're singing with another singer who's doing harmonies and echoes and backups. So that seems to be kind of a way for you to be carving out your own niche too. Is that accurate?
I don't know if the goal there is intentionally specifically to carve out something for myself. The goal is to sort of explore like what fits well, or what I like, or like what I haven't tried before. So yeah, you're right. I've been experimenting a lot more with different sounds. I've been leaning into the singiness. I've been leaning into putting different like voices over each other, so to seeing how they harmonize, and like also working with other people. So yeah, it's literally me exploring and sort of furthering my path as an artist. So thank you for noticing.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, I've been paying attention, and it's like, just when I thought I had you figured out, you threw me a curve, which I love.
Yay.
Yeah.
You got to keep the people on their toes.
Yeah. Whenever I bring a singer or a rapper on here, I want to make sure that our audience actually gets to hear some of your craft and not just hear us talk about it. So I would like to start with Gray Skies. I think that's a track that I definitely think brings together the elements that we're talking about here. So set it up for us before we listen to a sample.
This song, yes, is a pandemic song.
Perfect.
It's about getting through the blues, but also being in a relationship while being a little bit depressed. I'm not sure if it's fully about depression, because I don't understand depression that well, to be honest. But it's just when you're feeling almost trapped and drowning in your whatever you're feeling, just understanding and the idea that knowing that, okay, like this is just a wave that needs to ride out, and I'll eventually get to the other side. So that's what this song is about.
All right, well, let's take a listen.
You say, baby, it's a feeling that just come and go. You say, baby, then you save me and you pull me close. Them gray skies gon' pass us by, and sun will shine through blues. Keep your heart, and that's when I knew that you made a go. Low tide these days, I be in and out them ways. 9 to 5 ain't got my soul corroding. Mine ain't even mine these days. On E, low key I be running with the liquor through these veins, till you pull me out and say, didn't see you coming, babe. Didn't see you coming, babe. Didn't see your loving coming, baby. On me, tell them, pray to God that you don't ever let me run away.
So you mentioned that this was also about not just being in a pandemic, but being in a relationship. So is that based on your life?
Yes. A lot of the songs that I write are based on my life, or at least so far. Like, I haven't done an imaginative sort of session. Yeah. But yeah.
Doesn't that feel a little risky? Like, you're putting it out there, you're being vulnerable.
Yeah. That's the point, isn't it?
I know.
It's the point. It's terrifying. It's literally the scariest thing. But, I think that it's a necessary terrifying. And just because it's terrifying doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's even more terrifying to do it. But then once you do it, it feels great. And then you do it over and over again to the point where it gets easier and easier and easier. But it's still terrifying, yes.
When some of these songs involve people other than yourself, whether it's a person in a relationship with, or we're going to listen to another one about a former roommate, do you ever feel like you need to get their permission or you don't? And then they get back to you and go, hey, what's up with that? You wove me into this.
Oh. You gotta ask Taylor Swift that question. I'm kidding.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm kidding. But I think I'm just going to be very respectfully. I'm not saying any names.
Yeah.
It might not have been a roommate.
Okay.
It could have been. Okay. It could have been a colleague. It could have been work. It was allegedly. I'm just allegedly.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think so because I don't think. I mean, maybe I should, but the relationship isn't good, so I'm not going to reach out.
Yeah. And that's life.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
Right? I was a big proponent of storytelling, narrative, which I think good art tells great stories. And to our earlier point, Jackie Faye, I think the stories, the more human, the more real they are, the more authentic, the more vulnerable, they're the more powerful, right? Because people can really connect because it's not just made up stuff. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I came across in my studying stories is when all of us tell our stories, our real stories, we always make ourselves the hero in our version of the story. Right? And so I just kind of remind myself of that. It's not something I could ever shed or you could ever shed. But, sometimes I remind my listeners, because I tell my stories in my intros to these episodes all the time. And every once in a while, I'll remind our listeners, don't forget, this is my version. Like I'm sure if you talked about the unnamed alleged person that instigated, right? It's like I'm sure they have their version where they're the hero. Yes. But you're listening to me, and I'm trying to be fair, but I'm also trying to be real.
Yes, that's real.
Right?
Yes, there are two sides to every story, and just take mine with a grain of salt. Also, understand that my motivation was internalized self-therapy and entertainment.
There you go.
So just understand that, yes, this is not the truth. It was just my truth and what I needed to say to get through that. Yeah. So no one out there take it that seriously. Don't even ask. It's entertainment, hopefully.
Well, it's almost like when you watch these movies that it's supposed to be about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Usually there's a disclaimer at the front that says, based on real events. But it's not necessarily a documentary.
Right. Hopefully no one's out there what are the receipts of what actually happened? Yeah. Does anyone have any cameras? I think the main point of that story is when you feel like somebody did you wrong. Do you sort of take it or do you sort of stand up for yourself? At least in my hero version of the story.
Yeah.
The other person could totally be I don't know, something else Jackie deserved it. I don't know. So
well, okay. So this is a perfect setup for the next track I want you to drop, which is Jackie Faye Adventures. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll listen to a sample.
Jackie Faye Adventures is inspired by one of the greatest early 2000s cartoons ever, Jackie Chan Adventures.
Oh.
The phrase "Yumo goi goi fai di zao" is this chant that the uncle in the cartoon uses to fend off bad spirits because there's evil monsters in the show, and he's always "Yumo goi goi fai di zao." And I turned it into a rap because it was about this time where I was facing demons, external and internal. And it's just a chant. And the song is just, it's a fun song about how to just remind yourself to just keep the haters away.
Nice. Let's take a listen.
You know what? I'm about to say
this shit crazy.
I don't care that you broke your elbow.
You more quick, I fight the toe up in it, bit. Catch me looking fly up on the internet. My name Jack, I copped the whip, I hopped in it. Kept my name up in your mouth and said what's poppin'. I'm a stingy Chinese, getting all fuss about these. Petty with the wetty drip, JFAYE. Hater been tryna test me, You don't want no problems, no, you don't want no codeine. bitch. You stole my TV. You was mad. You was tryna see me, but I ain't fucking with some snitch. Bum bitch, Fuka who kicked, then she called the institution. I'm gonna walk that talk like a boss, bitch.
Shifting to something a little bit more serious, Jackie, certainly during the Trump time, this anti-Asian racism, how have you been hearing that, seeing that, experiencing that? Has it already started to kind of creep into your work, your art? Or do you see kind of a use for, not a use, but using your art as a platform to be another voice to push back against this?
Well, one, anti-Asian racism has always existed.
Yeah, hello.
In very specific pockets and just historically how our communities have operated, in my opinion. But yeah, it's like definitely brought to the forefront with Mr. Trump.
Yes.
And so
45, as he likes to be called now.
Well, who cares what he likes to be called? But anyway, but whatever. And then, I mean, yeah, I think what's interesting is that I also don't want to like just make crazy political assumptions. I think there's intent behind this racism, just like there always has. I mean, there's complications, you know, with the relationship between U.S. and China right now at play. I think there's something potentially larger at play here, but I have no idea. That's just how I feel. But the point is, and always a friendly reminder, if you're Asian, you're not white. And if there's any more clear time to see that, it's now. If there's any clear time to recognize that we have serious race relations and that racism and American racism is the foundation upon which our current America is built. And at a certain point, we have to recognize, like, okay, do we just want to keep it going and then just try to be white so we can be on the winning side? Or do we have to address a very, very difficult and strenuous and like gigantic problem that I don't even know how to begin to solve? But I think the point is, like, we have to choose a side in a sense, or at least for ourselves. We have to choose, like, okay, we can say stop Asian hate, but what if it doesn't stop? You can't really, you know, what, meaning like, am I really going to sit here and try and be best buddies with somebody that's like, fuck Asians, like I really want to attack your grandma, or me, if I turned 50 in the year 2021, I'd be getting attacked. Are you really going to be like, hey, buddy, like come back to my place after you just tried to like beat my wife for no reason because you were a coward? Like, no, you know? And so then, you know, Asian Americans, I think we really have to ask ourselves, like, what are we doing? And do we really understand like the larger impact? And when we see Black Americans, Black and brown people getting shot. And I just want to say, like, the rallies and stuff are amazing. Like, shout out to us. We organized pretty quickly. But we have to recognize also our privilege and relationship to this. Like, our rallies aren't getting, like, busted by the police like Black Lives Matters ones are. And, like, how do we organize, not just within ourselves, which is already a very messy label amongst, like, for, right? How do we organize amongst ourselves, and how do we organize with other communities as well to address this? Because Asians aren't the only ones that are experiencing this. And even though it's, like, more on the rise now, I think it's more of a call to action on us. Like, what are we going to do about it? Because just saying stop isn't going to do anything. And it's like, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to organize and assert our own identities in this space? Because this is our home too.
Yeah.
And we deserve a say, like, period.
Let me toss something at you, because I think that who you are in your artist mode, right? This blended Taiwanese, Korean, queer, female, rapper, singer, just who you are right now is a part of the pushback. And the reason I'm saying that is because, I mean, our history with our Black neighbors hasn't been good as Asian Americans, right? So, and that's been a little bit fraught, you know, as some of these assailants have been Black, right? And so I feel like just you stepping out of your engineer, you know, daytime job into this space as who you are, everything that you are, Jackie, it actually is something different. Like, not just white America, but even Black America has to go, hey, you know what? She's here. You know, she deserves her space, and we got to listen to her. Like, all right, let's try.